Okay. Great. Looks like we're ready to start. I'll call this meeting to order. Today is the January 17th Recreation Commission meeting, and we'll begin by doing a territorial acknowledgement. I'd like to acknowledge that the lands on which we gather are the unceded territories of the Comox First Nation, the traditional keepers of this land. And I understand, I'll call on Director Grieve regarding a delegation request here.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I ask the board's indulgence in bringing forward a late delegation request. We have members from the Comox Valley Farmers Institute, Comox Valley Exhibition Society. We have Music Fest as well. I think we might even have somebody coming later from the Comox Valley Athletic Society, and pertaining to the fact that we are commencing a visioning process on March the 2nd regarding strategic planning for this commission, and it's regarding the possibility of looking into synergies and cooperation with these groups to bring forward a building on the site that's been kicked around for about 20 years now. So I'd ask the board's permission to receive a late delegation from Ben Vanderhorst.
I think I need a seconder for that. Thanks. Yeah, and just for the board's information, it is a late delegation request, so it does need 2/3 majority in order for the delegation to be received today. Our next meeting is February 14th, which is in a week in advance of our next strategic planning. So whether we receive the delegation today or at the next meeting, we will be able to hear from them before we meet for our next planning session. And Councillor Morin, go ahead. Or Director Morin.
Oh, is the mic on?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, it is red. So I guess the delegation, if approved, would be 10 minutes. Is that correct? Plus questions. I'm just, there'd just be one speaker. I'm just clarifying that because we did add this meeting to make up for running over the last meeting, and I just wouldn't want us to be in the same situation. So I don't know if there was a buffer that was left for this meeting in terms of estimating the discussion time, but I'm just putting that out there. Thanks.
They are aware of the time restraint.
And alternate Director Jolicoeur.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I guess just to add my comments to Director Morin is that one of my questions for today was that I'm feeling that the depth and the importance of the discussions leading up to strategic planning with the multiple reports being something that I think deserves the time and the deliberation of this commission. And I also am of the opinion that it's important to not stifle community input. And so I'm happy that there's a delegation here wanting to add their voices to this process. I would just want to ensure that we are not in a place again where we're having to rush through questions, and that we have the opportunity to have our questions answered in a thoughtful way from staff and consultants. So I just would like to hear if there is a consideration of having a delegation today, that we do have space, or we can organize more space for us to continue to process what we have in front of us today.
Yeah, well, we're constrained to 90 minutes today for the discussion because there is a meeting scheduled afterwards. So the other constraint, I understand that the delegation is fairly concise. However, it won't really allow for much time for follow-up questions if we want to stick to enough time for the plan discussion. So it is a consideration. and Director Grant.
Yeah, I think the next delegation or the next meeting that we have after this is an in camera, so I'm not really concerned about going a little bit over time if that were the case. It's not like we've got a public issue here that people are going to be coming and going from the meeting. So if we were a little bit late, I don't think it would make much difference.
Edwin, are you wanting to speak again or?
Well, it's just that we've already eaten up 6 minutes of this discussion.
All right, hearing that, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? And that passes. So you're welcome to come up. I understand that this is the podium.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
suggested to Mr. Vanderhurst, you might want to sit at the table because the camera will receive him there. It doesn't necessarily reach to the podium.
Okay,
So
thanks.
Okay, thank you for allowing us to speak today. I know you have quite a schedule. But the purpose here today of our attendance is to seek the commission considering to take the next step in terms of looking at the possibility of putting a facility on the fairgrounds, a multiplex type of building, by budgeting for a business case to be done that would establish the viability and the need for the facility. If you go back through your own records, you'll see that over the last 20 years, there have been a number of iterations of a fairgrounds plan, which included a building. Every iteration up until I believe it was 2019, included a facility. And our group, the Comox Valley Multiplex Association, was formed in about 2017 to promote the actual development of the facility. So we've done concept drawings, we've done presentations to many of you have heard our presentations because we approached all the councils, the regional district board, everyone in the communities that we could think of to listen to what we thought should happen on the fairgrounds. And we're a group that represents the Farmers Institute, Comox Valley Farmers Institute, Comox Valley Exhibition Association, the two primary groups that had proposed buildings back in the about 2014 and 15. So a number of you are already familiar with this, and I'd like to remind you all that when we did this discussion back in 2016, 17 with all the councils, it was practically unanimous in terms of support and principle for the concept. So I don't think we have to go too far into that. What we really need to do, I believe, is take the next step of determining whether it's actually going to make sense to put this facility up. We believe it is. We believe the community wants and needs a facility of this nature. It's a multiplex building that would be primarily in the start an agricultural focus. So we know that there are also discussions ongoing about an ag plan, about a food hub, and other recreation needs in the valley. And we think that this facility would meet all of those, and that it's time to have that discussion about whether it makes sense to move forward with this. I really don't have too much more to say other than that. I'm certainly open to questions because we just want to make sure we address whatever your concerns might be.
Thank you for bringing this issue forward. Is there anyone that has any questions? Director Arbor.
He's first up.
Oh.
Oh, you passed it.
I've got my list backwards. Is your mic? There we go.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I'm glad that the commission, the Sports Commission now includes the exhibition grounds because then we can kind of see from this agenda what other capital costs that we're facing here. And they're quite significant with our other facilities, both the arenas and the aquatic facilities. require quite large investments. And so I think when we're talking about a whole other building that it comes up against those other costs that we're facing right now. And it was my understanding that there was a business case done. I recall looking at a business case before, and that the income coming from the Agriplex wasn't really a viable business case that I saw previously. Having said that, I am very interested in moving forward with our agricultural plan and with the food hub. And so as far as this overlaps with those, I'm interested in forwarding those ideas. Thanks.
Okay, so yes, there was what's called a business case done in 2016, which was not a complete business case in that all of the financial side of it wasn't fully addressed. So we didn't address what kind of revenues could be fully developed here. Had rough estimates of the construction cost, but it wasn't a fully fleshed out business case in that sense. And that's where I think we really need, we're not asking for a building to be put up and as part of your plan right now, we're asking for the business case to be done so that we can determine whether this is something that the board in the future may decide is something we really need to approach. And we think it has a lot of overlap with the recreational needs of the valley as well. So if you're looking at recreational facility needs, we think this may be part of your solution.
A few more questions here. Go ahead, Director Orber.
Yeah, thanks. There's many reports that we're considering right now, but one that was not tabled by staff, maybe they'll address that later, is the site plan for the exhibition ground, which was prepared a couple of years ago and kind of lays out the potential footprint for a smaller building. So I remember seeing that, but I don't think we did much more work or joined the dots with the old business case. This will take some time, but I don't know. It may be worthwhile to bring that discussion forward to ESC first, and then see if because there's a strong connection, as Dr. Kettler said, with the agricultural planning and all the rest of that. So it may be worthwhile to have a discussion there, whether that could be a place to find some money to complete the business case and have that discussion. And then that'd be my thoughts for today. Thank you.
Thanks for those comments. Go ahead, Director Grant.
Yeah, I'm just wondering how much money are we looking at for a business case study? Are we looking at $1,000 or $100,000?
Somewhere in between.
Thanks for that.
I don't really know. I've heard a number actually of a full scale business case that looks at every need in terms of developing your yay or nay case is about $75,000.
Yeah, I think a building like this, I mean, I can see many needs in our community for different sizes of buildings that we have. And so just depending on what the use would be for this, like, Edwin's talked about indoor pickleball and being able to use it for all sorts of different things, I think could be a really, really valuable asset to our community. I know from a fundraising aspect, we're always trying to do community things, and you can't get enough people in a 450, 400 people doesn't make you enough money to make it viable. So if we could get, I think there's a whole bunch of different uses that a building like this could work. So I'd be interested to see what a business case said about all that.
Yeah. Okay. So the original plan, if I could just address that, included banquet style seating for about 1,500 people. So, and it also allowed you to have pickleball. So it's a multi-purpose, really a utilitarian building is what we had in mind.
Thanks. And one more question here from alternate director Jolicoeur.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I didn't catch your name.
Ben Vanderhorst.
Thank you. So 2016 is a while ago. I haven't seen any reports or any of the documents that you referred to. So if you can send that along to me, that would be great. Or if staff can. My question is specifically, what is it that you're looking for the commission to consider? Is it simply for the collaboration on funding a business case? Is it for it to be put on the strategic plan for us to analyze? What are the specific asks of your group?
At this point, what we're asking for is the funding for the business case. And nothing else, actually.
Great. Oh, we have one more question here. Director Hardy.
Thanks. I guess moving forward, again, we're being asked to look at a strategic plan for a number of activities. And again, when we're talking about the Recreation Commission, we're looking at forward thinking with regards to an aquatic facility to be kind of thought about or built over the next 15 to 20 years with a considerable budget. Again, one of these, a facility such as this has been something that my involvement with the Comox Valley Economic Development Society over years was something that was seriously contemplated. I think there was a provincial commitment to help in support of putting a facility such as this in place. Long story short, I don't think we should be just looking at a business case. We should also be thinking along the lines of this being involved in our strategic planning for the recreation side of things and for the strategic and budgeting side of things from the Comox Valley Regional District side of things as well. Thanks.
Thanks. And Director Morin.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just curious. I'm trying to go back. It was obviously before I was on the board, but the business case that was presented before, was it not funded through something? I guess I'm just wondering. There was some funding provided for the last one, so I'm just wondering why it
there
wasn't
was.
a comprehensive plan.
Okay, funding that was provided was to be able to do some concept drawings and put together a report on that. And it wasn't a comprehensive business case from that perspective. So the funding came from Growing Forward, the province and the federal government shared program.
And what was the funding for that?
About $15,000.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Seeing no other questions, could I get a motion for receipt? Thanks. Anyone opposed to receipt? Carried. Thank you for bringing this issue forward.
Thank you.
And we'll return to the agenda. And there's no additional items, other than new business, since we're here last week. So we'll continue on with the discussion around our strategic capital planning session and the materials that staff have brought forward. We'll get a brief summary of the aquatic strategy that we are discussing, as we weren't able to complete that discussion. So we'll go through each item again as we did before. So if I could get a motion to receive the aquatic strategy. Anyone opposed to receipt? We wait to vote. Never mind. I'll pass it over to staff.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners, and I'll just ask Jennifer Zibin and Doug DeMarzo to come to the table and join you. They will lead you through the various reports that we have here. They are supported by the consultants that prepared these reports. When it comes to the field study, I'm pleased to report that Benny, the expert with respect to a component of that, is also available to answer your questions. So we can go through the various reports, and then staff will present the two that were not previously provided, the capital projects and the arena strategy, for your consideration and questions. So I turn it over to Jennifer to introduce the consultants.
Thank you. Through the chair. As a follow-up to last week's Recreation Commission, staff and the recreation, the consultants for the aquatic strategy and the field study strategy are both online to continue the conversation and sort of finish off any last minute questions and thoughts that have come up between last week and this week. So the first one we're going to start up with is the aquatic strategy. So I believe we have Mike Roma from RC Strategies online. And Mike was going to just do a quick run through the options that were brought forth last week and then take questions from there. So Mike, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Jennifer. And I am joined by Brian, Megan, and Paul. And also I'm joined by a faulty video camera right now. So I'm doing my best to get my face in front of you. I'm just going to unplug and plug it in again. Apologize in advance for that technical issue. But yeah, we're here to, I guess, follow up from our presentation that was delivered to you. We have one additional member of our team that's able to join us today, and that's Brian, who I believe was in front of the commission at an earlier date, but obviously some of you wouldn't have met him because some of you weren't there. So anyways, Brian's the new face, and we're all here to answer any questions that you might have.
Director Kettler.
Thanks. Yeah, some of the things I didn't get to ask from the last meeting, starting with the aquatic study, was around the greenhouse gas emissions and the option that had the best greenhouse gas reduction. It seemed that that was only from an operational point of view because it was the completely new facility, everything. New land, new building, all of that stuff. And so obviously it would be great, new energy efficient building. So from that perspective would be saving greenhouse gases. But I wanted to hear more about, the thought of the impact of the new construction and possible deconstruction or decommissioning of other facilities and the greenhouse gas impacts of that.
Right on. Through the chair, thank you for that. I'm still struggling with my camera, obviously, so I'm not going to struggle with that anymore. And hopefully you can remember what I looked like, if that even matters. But I'm going to still. Sorry.
Go ahead. No one asked anything.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So just in terms of addressing that question through the chair, I'm still going to quarterback kind of your request. So I'd pass it on to Paul first to talk about the construction and then Brian to follow up with how that aspect of the options was reflected in the scoring and matrix. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, and through the chair. So the discussion around greenhouse gas emissions for the project really would fall, I guess, into two categories. The traditional way in which that's been measured has been around operational carbon, and I think we've provided a narrative around the kind of or some analysis around the new build version taking most advantage of potential greenhouse gas reductions, just because when you build a new building these days, you have to build it to current codes and standards, and many of those standards are requiring a level of performance from buildings that is far exceeding any of the existing buildings that are currently around. And so just by virtue of adopting new codes and standards, you're able to reduce the greenhouse gas profile significantly. The other piece of the conversation around GHGs is the embedded carbon or the embodied carbon, which relates a little bit more to construction and refers to the carbon that is embedded in the materials that we use to construct a new facility. And so that's sort of a one-off carbon accounting exercise that happens during construction. And in that case, the things that need to be balanced in those conversations is whether or not you're there's obviously always a case to keep older buildings from a carbon accounting standpoint because they already have the carbon in them. So that does provide a rationale to some degree around retention of existing structures versus building new structures. So those two things need to be weighed against each other. There's lots of complexity and interrelationships between the two, but that's how they would impact this conversation.
Great, thanks for that.
We have another question from Director Arbor.
Yeah, thanks. I guess my recurring theme today will be concerns around. I mean, I'm really glad we've done all these reports and analysis for the future, but I'm really concerned on a couple of levels. One is the economic context that we're in, where construction costs are currently sky high, inflation pressures are massive on all of our services. A lot of local government are heading into 15% increases, and that might be the next few years. That's one level of concern, just the cost of things. So the status quo cost, the status quo approach outlined in option 1 to me looks quite favorable right now. And the second level of concern is around the centralized nature of a lot of the recommendations, especially the ones that focus on building out at the existing site, either adding outdoor or indoor facility. All of our regional assets are currently on the east side of the Puntledge River. And access is a concern, obviously, in Area A. People in Fanny Bay, I hear it from them. It's far. The traffic is increasing going across the bridge. And I don't know, but then when you look at the new sites, it's expensive. If we were going to do something like, even in the other reports, it's expensive. So everything's expensive on the building side. And then for me, the locations are not great. I was wondering if, and you heard that from me very briefly last meeting, my concept is let's get out of the buildings, which costs a lot to operate, costs a lot in carbon, costs a lot on all fronts, and move towards this Recreation Commission moving more towards nature-based recreation, low cost infrastructure, distributed infrastructure across the region. On the outdoor pool, maybe for the consultant, I was going to ask if there was any consideration. I think the Director Kettler brought that up 3 years ago around looking at a site like of an outdoor pool that's nature-based. If you look around Lewis Park, something that draws from the Puntledge River, something creative, innovative, that doesn't face the same kind of hard concrete, literally cement costs as other things, or if there's other things that we could look at that I know a lot of jurisdictions around the country do, investing more in their natural assets rather than their built assets.
Thank you through the chair, and I think you can see me now, so hello. I'm going to pass that off to Paul, because I know that his firm has been involved in those types of facilities.
Thank you, Mike. Through the chair, there are certainly options to be considered when we talk about outdoor pools, and they range from sort of more passive interventions, which would be sort of a diversion of some natural bodies of water into a slightly more formal sort of swimming hole, as it were, to naturally filtered swimming pools, to concrete tank outdoor pools like you have existing. So I think at this stage, we wouldn't rule any of those out. All of those would be feasible considerations. They all come with operational considerations that would need to be considered. Things like how many bathers they can support, what the operational cost is, what the bathing season of those types of facilities are. But at this stage, we haven't ruled any of those out. In fact, there's probably good merit to consider some of those more closely.
Thank you. I've got a few more questions in the queue here. Director Grieve.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I think Daniel Arbor's actually been reading my old notes from one of my old books and talk about full life cycle carbon costing, which is, the part that is kind of greenwashed out of the equation a lot of the times, because I think the two most polluting businesses or processes in construction is concrete and steel. And, what we have, like they always say, your greenest building is the one you already own. I've said it before, even around, having to wait 2.5 years for an electric pickup truck. What is the full carbon cost of that pickup truck the day it arrives in your parking lot, from the the extraction of the raw materials shipped around the world and the milling, the manufacturing shipped back here, all that stuff. It's usually conveniently left out of the equation. So I do think that we have to consider that. You know, it's buildings can be made to last a long time. You know, we don't need to have the latest and greatest of everything all the time. So that's been my credo for the last 2 years. And I'm glad that Director Arbour is seeing the light.
Thank you, Director Grief. And next up, we have Director Moran.
Great, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to bring up a couple things that I brought up at the Courtney meeting because it fits into the conversation. So sorry to be repetitive to our consultants. But I'm with Director Arbour in terms of exploring the possibility of a naturalized type pool as an outdoor pool. And I brought up at our Courtney meeting that there was a lot of attention paid in the study to the experiential, excuse me, needs and wants of the community. And it would be a stretch, I think, to think that most people would like to go to an outdoor pool up beside a road with 2 other pools. So I'm pretty lukewarm on that. And interestingly, after the Courtney meeting, I did have some people contact me and say, I don't want to be at an outdoor pool up there in that area. And just to note that also in the study, and this backs up what Director Arbour said, that the population growth has been occurring in Area A, Cumberland, and Courtney, but that's all of Courtney, so it's not broken down. So I think we do need to look at, you know, the potential south area coming on, and Comox First Nations, Comox First Nation lands, as well as our bolstering community in Cumberland, and not have everything centralized. However, I do understand the rationale in the report, the efficiencies and all those kinds of things. But yeah, those are sort of the comments I made at the last meeting. I just wanted the board here to consider that. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing those. And next up, we have Director Kerr.
Thank you. So as a big proponent for excellent recreation facilities, but also getting some sticker shock when I see some of these numbers, you know, this is maybe a broader question for all of these reports, aquatics and the other facilities, even the potential agricultural building. What are the opportunities for the CVRD to partner with industry or companies for large scale sponsorship? The company X aquatic center or skating rink or et cetera, et cetera. It's done in a lot of other communities, wondering if that would help lessen some of the cost to taxpayers.
Thanks for the question through the chair. I'm not sure. I can't read the room to see if staff was interested in providing an answer to that or not. But
staff was willing to step in and answer that one if you'd prefer to have our staff respond.
Okay, well then maybe through the chair, if that will let staff respond, obviously, and then we might have kind of a rule of thumb to add after that, but we'll see.
Okay, great. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Through the chair, I think the rule of thumb will definitely apply, and I look forward to that addition to look at it from a larger perspective. But from our own approach in the past in this valley, we have had those opportunities at times, and they have not really come to fruition. And I think one other major consideration in this valley, aside from maybe 1 or 2 larger corporations, there's really no corporations that are heavily invested in this valley that have a large sponsorship opportunity and might cease to take that on. That being said, when you're looking at the cost of the buildings to those levels, it's challenging to envision a major corporate donation that would put a significant impact on that. There might be some advertising or naming rights or other pieces such as that. With the private partnership opportunities, I might leave that a little bit more for the consultant, but it's an avenue that we haven't approached in any great deal. We do see it sometimes in arenas and in other places where they might own and operate an arena for a number of years and those type of agreements, but those are usually affiliated with major revenue sources such as concerts or junior hockey team of significant caliber, such as WHL or other things. So we do see limitations here for those partnerships to have any significant contribution. That being said, we don't know, we haven't fully explored it. If there's someone out there that's looking for something that we're not aware of, but that opportunity is always here for people to come forward, and we haven't had any uptake on it. I'll pass it down to the consultants for some general comments as well.
Thanks.
Did you have?
Yeah, just something to add there through the chair, and Doug, that was a very good answer. Actually, I took some notes and might use some of what you answered the next presentation that we're in. But what I was going to say is, just as a general rule of thumb, and there is definitely no empirical research to back this up, but as a general rule of thumb, we wouldn't expect that you could get more than 10 to 15% of your capital costs funded through not only sponsorship, but also government grants. There are some anomalies where a higher portion of capital costs are recovered through external sources, but it is an anomaly for sure. So I would just echo what Doug had mentioned, that there are possible sponsorship opportunities in every community, but it's very unlikely that it would be significant enough to help you make a very hard decision about large public investment in any of these amenities. And I would, Doug invited a comment on operational partnerships, where you might have what some people call a P3 arrangement, or there are different kind of alternative structures to involving the private sector in the development of facilities and in the operations of facilities. But again, I would say those are one-offs, and even where they do occur, they lead to savings, typically more on the operational side than the capital cost side of the equation. But there's pros and cons to involving private or non-profit sector operators in service delivery that definitely can all be covered in the 30 seconds that we have here to respond to the question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for providing that additional context. And I have another question from Director Grant.
Thank you. Well, I think a question that we need to ask when I read this report and see that the outdoor pool really, in general, doesn't get a lot of use. And I think a question we need to wrestle with is, do we even need one? Are we even going to go there? Because if you took that money out, you could actually reallocate it into some of these other things, and it might be a better fit. I'm not saying it is, but I think it's something we need to think about. Secondly, I noticed on the bottom of these reports, one of the last ones is an asset management report, but it actually talks more about what we need to maintain the buildings till the end of life. It doesn't actually talk about an asset management plan that's got a replacement for the building in it. And I think that if you're going to do this, just to add to Daniel's comment about the expense, I think you need to start looking at asset management, putting money aside for the future as you go. And there's kind of a basic rule in asset management that, in 50 years, you need to put 5 times away. So if you do that on a $35 million building, you need $175 million in 50 years to deal with that. So I think that's something we need to wrestle with. And I think that we've been left kind of out in the cold, where we're finding this in our community. Everything's 50 to 60 years old now. It's all breaking and nobody put anything aside. So I don't think we want to fall into that trap anymore. So I would like to see us start putting an asset management plan together for, everything, but especially this.
Thanks for those comments, Director Grant. I see we have another question in the queue here from Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to clarify with the consultants' comments that you made in the past about outdoor pools. When Courtney was looking at this a few years ago, based on concerns about maintenance needs and what the lifespan was of the outdoor pool, one of the things that was suggested was that communities were moving away from this sort of an amenity. I grew up in a community that didn't have an outdoor pool, and Of course, we have all sorts of options here. We have lakes, we have rivers, we have the ocean. So I'm just wondering if I know that there's a lot of people in the community that are attached to this resource, but the question would have to come up: are they attached to it to the point of ponying up the money that it would take to replace it? So I'm just wondering if you can comment again on the tendencies in communities. I think you did say that some communities are actually building these facilities anew, but what are we seeing across the country in terms of these types of facilities?
Thanks for the question through the chair. I'll actually have Brian comment on this so you can hear probably a similar answer, but through a different voice. And then I'll maybe follow up if there's anything I'd like to add after. So go ahead, Brian.
Currently, there are fewer outdoor pools in BC than there were 10 years ago, and fewer 10 years ago than there were 20 years ago. So outdoor pools are definitely on the decline. One of the reasons is, and this might surprise people, it certainly typically surprises our clients, is that the net public subsidy per swim in an outdoor pool is typically higher than for an indoor pool. And when you say, how can that be? An indoor pool costs a lot more to operate than an outdoor pool. Outdoor pools are subject to weather, and you often still have to hire without kind of being able to send people home sooner than a 4-hour minimum shift, et cetera. And so you get staffing inefficiencies in an outdoor pool that typically you don't get in an indoor pool. And you also have high startup costs and close down costs at the beginning and end of each summer season. And so in almost every study we've done of aquatic services, the net public subsidy per swim of an outdoor pool is higher than in an indoor pool. And the trend seems to be going towards what are called kind of indoor-outdoor pools. In other words, connecting an outdoor pool to an indoor pool, and the tremendous cost savings, both from a capital point of view and an operating point of view and an energy point of view that accrue from that. And that's typically the way to bring net public subsidy per swims in outdoor pools back in line. But certainly outdoor pools are on the decline in this province as a trend, and especially so in communities that have got lakes and rivers and ocean options for people to swim outdoors during the 100 days of a typical pool operating season.
That's helpful, thanks.
Okay, I think that was our last question on this topic, and I appreciate you making the time to come back and allow us to dig a little deeper into these questions with our constraints last meeting. And I think that the questions and answers today are going to help inform our next step in this process of deciding on our path forward on aquatics. And now we'll vote on receipt. Anyone opposed? That's carried. And our next item is the sports field study report, and we'll pick up where we left off with that. Thank you. I'll pass it over to staff. Nope.
Thank you through the chair. We have from RC Strategies, we have Steve Sluta on the Zoom, and he's just going to do a quick review, a short review, and then we're open for questions for the consultant and for the staff. Thank you. Steve, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Jennifer, and good afternoon, everyone. Just as was alluded to earlier, I'm pleased to be joined by Blair Arbuthnot from Binny, who is available today, and Blair is landscape architect and the technical expert, so he'll be able to answer any of the more detailed technical questions. So I'm happy again to have Blair with us here today. I was going to do just a quick run through of some of the slides from the last presentation, but I see that I'm not able to share my screen, so I don't know if someone can give me that permission. That would be great.
Yeah, we can help you with that. Just one moment.
You bet. Thank you. Okay, great. Thank you for that. So just recognizing that I think we were last on the agenda last time, so we got a bit squeezed with our presentation. Thought it'd be worthwhile just to run through a half dozen of the real key slides from the previous presentation, just to make sure everybody had the context as it relates to maybe what some of your questions are here. So just to go through a few of the draft strategy directions that we thought are probably most, they're all important, but maybe most kind of pertinent at this point in time. One of the key big moves that we proposed was looking to add a second artificial turf surface. So within the scope of our work was to assess that and identify whether a second surface was needed. And while some of the utilization data available to us is a little bit incomplete, and there isn't necessarily rationale to suggest that the current field is being used kind of at or over capacity. Ultimately, our analysis would suggest that adding a second artificial turf surface is going to be needed to align with future growth, and is in fact the most efficient and effective way to address future needs, particularly during the winter rainy season months, which had the lowest level of satisfaction and has the highest level of needs by your user group. And obviously artificial turf has a number of advantages during the rainy months. Related to that, Blair and his team from Binny went and did a number of suitability assessments of field sites across your area, within your boundaries, within the CVRD. And I mean, as an overall statement, and Blair can certainly speak more to this later on, I mean, you can put an artificial turf field down in a lot of different places. So it's just important to reiterate that this work was really about identifying those sites that were deemed to be most suitable. But certainly there are a number of other sites that could be pursued, but have various challenges and associated cost impacts. So Blair, maybe I'll just turn it over to you to kind of go through this slide here, just in terms of some of the factors that your team looked at and that are important to consider around artificial turf.
Thanks, Steve. So yeah, like outside of the actual footprint that is required to fit a typically sized synthetic turf field, typically based on a soccer field, 100 meters by 64 meters plus safety surfacing. That's just one component of what we're looking at for existing sites on whether they're, the most suitable, somewhat suitable, or start to kind of fall down the priority list. And so some of the considerations that we look at include lighting. Usually that's one of the key factors, not only from a cost to bring electrical services in, but also the potential impacts to surrounding land uses. Whether there's single family residential right beside a field that currently has no lighting, or does the site currently have lighting, or is the site currently a hub of activity, or is it a fairly quiet area that doesn't have a lot of eyes on the street? So lighting is definitely a significant factor that we hear often as either a limiting factor or is a suitable factor for redeveloping a area for a synthetic turf field. Oftentimes we'll hear, well, do we need lighting? Yes, if you're going to be investing into a synthetic turf field for the all-round use, and considering the sun goes down in the middle of winter, 4 or 5 o'clock at night, and you have programming up until 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, field lighting is definitely a key factor for usage and utilization. Access and parking is another element that often is a consideration for us, because with an increased use and utilization comes people wanting to use the field. And so having parking, easy access off of a collector road or a local road, or even getting to and from. So not even considering parking, but are they going through local roads and increasing the traffic to and from the field are considerations that we look at as well. And then just as I said, footprint and field size, adjacent infrastructure. The other element that we look at is in terms of what the existing condition is from ground and grading consideration. So, is it on a hillside? Is it a relatively flat site? Is it an existing field that generally suitable. One thing that we do find that is often overlooked is that historical construction of sports fields are usually a result of the space left over. So for instance, a school gets built or a community center gets built, everything gets excavated out, and then the adjacent area right beside it just gets filled with the material that no one wants to build a structure on. And then we come back 30 years later and find that, the ground conditions are not ideal, because if you're standing very tall lights, upwards of 70, 80, 90 feet tall, and you're building 30-foot fencing around it, you need a ground condition that's suitable for building. So as far as the sites that we had identified during our initial investigation was these 3 sites identified here, which was Billmore, Vanier, and Highland. With Billmore, there's a lot of footprint to deal with. There could be some challenges with lighting, and the site conditions suggest that this option may incur additional costs in terms of how it currently functions. With Vanier, which has the potential to be quite a hub of activity, there already is a synthetic turf field there. There's a few locations that could be considered within the site. There's ample parking, there's ample field access, as well as synergies to potentially have a little bit more of a tournament hosting site with the community center, the arena and the secondary school that's right there. And then Highland Park, in terms of providing a different area within the community. So it's a little bit kind of decentralized from Vanier. So you have the ability to service a different need. And then we'd have to look at lighting and surface conditions a little bit further to verify if that would fall first, second, or third on the list.
Thanks, Blair. I'll just kind of run us through very quickly the rest of the slides here, which are basically things that we've already reviewed with you. But Blair and his team have come up with a kind of an estimate for a typical artificial turf field, which is in the $4 to $5 million range, and certainly Blair is available to answer any further questions on that once we get to the Q&A. Number of factors, which again, Blair is available to speak to, that kind of impact those costs. And again, these are very high level estimates. So it's more just to give you an order of magnitude in terms of what a field might cost at this point in time. And I mean, ultimately, further planning is going to be required on a preferred site beyond the scope of this study, should you decide to move forward and budget accordingly. There's a number of other recommendations we've made, and I won't spend a whole bunch of time on these. There were some questions last time, but we've suggested a new sport field classification system as a basis for planning and ongoing operations. A focus on enhancing washrooms and change rooms, as well as adding lighting at a couple key sites. These were really key themes that emanated out of our research and engagement. Developing a Class A baseball site, and then looking long-term at a new multi-field hub site, and just initiating some of that planning now, recognizing the land massing that's required for that type of site. More on the management side of things, we've just suggested a new approach to allocations, and we'll certainly flush that out a lot more in the document. A focus on spontaneous and unstructured use of your sport fields, recognizing that not all of your residents are engaging with sport fields through formal programming. A number of them are doing it in more kind of unstructured, casual, spontaneous ways. A single point of contact for bookings, something that a lot of your user groups referenced as something that they would like to see. Looking at aligning policies and procedures around things like rates and fees and maintenance processes, and then a process to evaluate needs for new and emerging field sports. So we heard last time, I think one of the presentations before us was from the cricket group. So the strategy presents a way to outline how to address needs from groups like that are emerging and could potentially grow in the future. So next steps, continue to refine the strategy, present it to the community and your groups, and then finalize the strategy, and then implement the strategy. So that's kind of a quick run through, refresher on the strategy content to date, and we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I've got a number of questions in the queue, so we'll get started. Is it Doug first? I have you first in the queue. Oh, I see. Not Director Hellion.
Thank you.
Go
Through the
ahead.
chair. I just want to make a quick comment just to kind of summarize what we've heard today and just kind of base our thoughts. One consideration that we often, as we get to read these strategies, such as the aquatic strategy or the field strategy, it's important to remember the Rec Commission is also has a strong reliance on its partners. For example, in the aquatic strategy, most outdoor pool questions will have to be answered by the city of Courtenay before they come here. And likewise, when you look at the fields, we don't actually own any spaces for any fields as a Rec Commission. So any of those conversations we have here, I would have went over this more in our strategic planning session, but it's a good time now too, is to understand that those all are going to involve partnerships, whether it's with the municipalities, rural areas, or the school districts. So just keep that in context. The strategic plan doesn't dive into that too much. A lot of that will happen at the operational level, much of rec leadership teams and the individual councils. But it's just a point I thought was worth making today.
Thank you. Okay, now into the questions. Got Director Arbor. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm glad Doug said that because, that is the case. We also have made smaller studies around the status of fields across the different schools in the rural areas and et cetera. And I think as a recreation commission, like we tend to focus on the big regional assets, but we haven't delved so much into the analysis of those neighborhood parks in relation to that. And but keeping a single focus on this one, same comment as earlier. I grew a little concerned. I see around centralized facilities. I think we did a study with tennis where we're looking at users and soccer as well, where it's almost like the chicken and egg thing where, you were seeing a lot of users where tennis courts were. And you see a lot of soccer players in Comox or where the facilities are. And you don't see it so much. It's not that they don't play, it's that the access is so difficult. So for me, if you look around the world, especially when it comes to fields, you distribute a little bit more equitably, even your regional assets. So on that basis, Vanier looks less interesting to me, even though it has sitting amenities and it has something, but Highland, as you mentioned, a new base, even though it's pretty far from Area A in my case. But I know the Highland field pretty well, so I know there's space there. I have a lot of questions about Billmore because I find it a very intriguing area that would better service the south and this side of the river as well. So for the consultants, there's just a line there that Billmore seems to have a lot of space. So when you say a lot of space, you also talked about the concerns around parking and all that. Like, do you believe we could actually develop a full site plan beyond the field, or would we just be squeezing a field there and then there'd be issues with parking and if we wanted bleachers and all the rest of it? Like, is there enough space at Billmore to do a full kind of facility, or is it constrained in that way?
Through the chair, I'll defer that to Blair. I think he might be better positioned to answer that.
Thanks, Steve. There's a lot to digest on that question, so thank you for raising it because, as you noted, it's not just the field, and it's something that I did allude to in terms of servicing field needs. The current arrangement as it sits currently offers diamond sports as well as field sports. And so there's a number of questions that would need to be answered before we would need to or be able to dive deeper into the design of a facility in this location. One of those main questions would be, would this field area be best suited to be a standalone rectangular field area that services just football or soccer, or could it be a more multi-sport complex that could also service diamond sports? There's no wrong answer to that question, but it is a decision that would need to be made and how best to design the site overall. And there are a number of examples of diamond sports overlapping with field sports on artificial turf surfaces. And then obviously, as the usage increases, so does the demand. And so if there's a desire to maximize utilization on this field, we would likely suggest a review of traffic impacts, circulation, and support amenities that would enable that facility. And obviously there's a structure, a field house building and elements. And so there's a decision that would need to be made on where do you draw that line in the sand. And if you're going to be investing, $4 to $5 million on a turf field, do you want to invest more into support amenities with field houses, washroom buildings, additional parking, and all that? So while I'd like to be able to answer that question with certainty, there's a lot more definition on the project scope that would need to be answered. At this point, it would be functionally, would you be able to fit a field there? Yes, without too much concern. Could it provide support amenities, spectator viewing areas, and other such elements? Yes, it could support all that. The extent of impact on the surrounding neighborhood and traffic has not been reviewed and should be addressed if this is a site as preferred. A lot of those additional background checks on impacts for that could be reviewed.
Thank you. We'll go on to the next question. I have Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair. Two questions. First of all, with regards to Bill Moore, which I wouldn't be in favor of as a location, but I'm just curious, the primary uses for that for field sports are baseball and North American football. And I'm just wondering if the local football people are interested in artificial turf. I'm not sure whether that's the best surface for particularly young players to be falling down hard on.
Maybe through the chair, maybe I'll start and then kind of kick that over to Blair in terms of kind of the technical or the condition of the site. As far as whether the groups would be amenable to that, we engaged with really all of the major user groups, but that process wasn't really intended to kind of test out artificial turf suitability through the engagement, because at that point we were still looking at assessing the different sites. So that would be something that would be part of the review process of the strategy to further vet some of the preferred site candidates. In terms of like the actual suitability of the surface, I don't know, Blair, if there's anything that you're able to add on that.
Yes, synthetic turf is a suitable surface for football, rugby, field hockey, field lacrosse. There are different types of synthetic turf that are a little bit more suitable for high contact sports in terms of the length of the fiber height, and all field surfaces for synthetic, that is, all have an under shock pad underneath the turf to provide the safest surface possible and limit contact injuries in terms of concussions, and GMAX testing is undertaken on those surfaces to ensure that is a safe surface.
My experience playing soccer is that the object of the game isn't to be pounded into the turf, where that very much is the object in rugby and football. But I'm editorializing. My other question is whether court sports fit into these considerations at all, particularly the growing phenomenon of pickleball.
Yeah, through the chair. Thank you for the question. Certainly as a firm, we're very familiar with the phenomenon that is pickleball and other court sport trends, but that wasn't included within the scope of the sport field strategy. But certainly with that said, if that's something that we could look to provide a little bit of comments on some of those synergies in the strategy in its final iteration. I would say, just as a general comment, the trend that we see is certainly a shift towards multi-use sites. So trying to get as much value out of a site as possible. But in terms of how courts fit into sport fields on specific sites, we wouldn't really be able to answer that at a very detailed level.
Okay, thanks.
I think Dr. Marzo has something to add here as well.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that we did do a court study a number of years ago, which was pickleball was one of the main sports to look into. So in that study, we did find that there was some need, and then there was a follow-up study after the sports at Highland pickleball courts were made there. And again, it was felt that there could be used to a more fuller extent in different operating hours before we looked at improving or considering any major new pickleball sport facilities. So things like some of the upgrades we've seen in lacrosse boxes and other places have also helped to fill that gap. But that's basically where that stands now. And we can provide more of that information from that past study at the strategic plan if you wish, but it's outside the scope of this study for the most part. Well, for its entirety, actually.
Thanks for that. And we'll move on to alternate director Jolicoeur.
Thank you, Chair. I guess I'll just start. I have a few questions. One pertaining to process. I'm seeing here next steps of refinement of the draft strategy, and I'm really excited about what we're considering here. I do find it a little bit difficult to consider the recommendations without being able to review the analysis that's been done and the study itself. There's a few key elements that have been shared in the PowerPoint slide, but I'm just wondering, before I get into the specific questions, if we can hear from staff or the consultants when we can actually expect to see the analysis component of the report.
Through the chair, staff anticipate being back to the Rec Commission prior to the March 2nd strategic planning session with the draft completed for review and questioning.
Great. And I'm really happy to hear some of the comments from Director Arbour around and the answer from the consultants around the transportation plan and the impact on parking and neighborhood impacts. That was something that I had. One of the interesting things between all of these reports, there's reference to regional growth and the regional growth strategy, specifically around where population density is going to occur over the next few years. And I did note that there was a difference actually between what the consultants on the aquatic strategy had and these consultants. So I don't know if it's going to be a question that can be answered today, but just an interesting difference between what the projections were and how those projections play out in the recommendations. Specifically, one of the assumptions that I have a question around is that adding a second turf, there's an assumption on the slide that says inventory is not at capacity. Can you share a little bit around how that was calculated?
Through the chair, yeah, you bet I can. So what we look at with artificial turf is kind of a prime time level of capacity, much like we would do analysis around an arena. So recognizing that typically weekday evenings, early evenings, and weekend time are the prime times of use for that amenity type. So we develop a capacity assumption, which is roughly about 2,500 hours of annual use, give or take, and then just look at what the current levels of utilization are. And based on our that analysis, the utilization is in kind of that 50 to 60% range. Now, with that said, I would say that like one of the things that we've identified in this strategy is the need for some enhanced data collection to be undertaken. And that's not a criticism of any of the municipal partners or the regional district. I would say that's a sector-wide challenge in terms of collecting data, particularly as it pertains to non-bookable data, so spontaneous use of fields and things of that nature. So hopefully that answers your question. So the level of utilization for prime time, there's certainly some room to grow there, but then there's kind of subcategories of prime time. So within that, there are certain peak seasons and very peak times that are at capacity, but kind of overall, there's certainly that field certainly isn't at capacity based on the data that we have.
Yeah, that's really helpful, actually, the qualifying the time of year, the evenings. And my second question to that, I'm glad that you mentioned the casual unstructured. So just to be clear, the assessment of we're under capacity right now, does that include the unstructured time?
Through the chart, no, it doesn't. So we don't like that data set doesn't exist on sport fields, and that's something that whenever we do this work, we're recommending some approaches for better collecting that. And it's hard data to collect because obviously it's not booked. It's people walking onto a field site, but there are some tactics that have had some limited levels of success in other jurisdictions. So we'll certainly provide those in the strategy.
Great. My second question is pertaining to the unstructured time. Now there's reference to inventory in terms of the access. I think it's 80% of people in the CVRD are 82% are within a 10-minute walking distance. In that assessment, does that include parks and facilities that are not necessarily sports fields, or are we looking at just the defining sports field as the things that that are able to place sports on?
Yeah, through the chair, great question. It's just designated sport field, so it doesn't include maybe what we term as like passive park spaces that aren't officially called a sport field or a ball diamond. So if we included those, that number would be even higher than the 82%, but 82% is still really quite strong, like one of the better levels of access we've seen doing a number of these studies.
Great. And my last question is just
we're going to move on to the next person because we're running out of time. I've got Director Kettler.
Thanks, Chair. So on your summary of other capital investment recommendations, you had initiate planning for a new multi-field hub site. And under that, it says not required for at least 10 to 15 years, but it would seem like that would be a good thing to have done for us before we're making a decision on where to plop down a turf field, is to look at the multi-field site, if that is indeed the strategy. And maybe you could speak a bit about that recommendation.
Yeah, you bet, through the chair. So I would say that, I mean, right now, your current sport field inventory is not at or nearing capacity overall. So within the short to medium term, we would suggest that there's opportunity to better leverage use out of your existing sites. And as it pertains to artificial turf, looking at a retrofit option, but long term, there's obviously trends are hard to predict. So that's why we're suggesting to at least initiate that planning in kind of its preliminary stages, because it takes a lot of land, of course, to assemble that type of facility. And through that process, you might also identify some synergies with other non-sport field recreation projects, whether that would be aquatics or sport courts or really any of those types of things. So it's more just making sure that long-term vision for another site is in kind of the group's mind.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. Thanks.
Great. I have one last question up and then we'll move on to the next item.
Thank you, Chair. One thing that wasn't really identified was maybe some enhancements to existing fields that, considering that we're not at capacity, but that might help us in the interim, such as adding lighting in fields. Fields that are well utilized, but maybe lighting in the evening could help. The cricket players, as an example, had talked about how they, they can play at different times, and the evening was one of the times that they mentioned. So, some of the areas that came up were like maybe Courtney Elementary, Valley View, or Woodcote. I know there are some improvements coming forward for Woodcote in the city's plan coming up. So I'm just curious if you could comment on something like adding lighting and the cost of that and the feasibility of maybe those kind of smaller enhancements to existing fields. Thanks.
Thank you. And through the chair, I'll start and then I'll maybe just kick it over to Blair for a quick comment on some of maybe the technical requirements of doing some of those things. So in terms of kind of smaller scale enhancements to existing sites, perhaps I skimmed over it too quickly in one of the slides, but we have recommended focus on enhancing washrooms and change rooms just generally at some key sites across the inventory, as well as considering the addition of lighting, and we've quantified that at between 2 and 4 sites, just to, as you said really well, to enable some better kind of dark season or evening use at those sites. So certainly those are all really important things, and they align well with what we heard from the engagement and research that we did. So they are going to be included within the strategy. And Blair, anything to add around kind of lighting and maybe some of the considerations around that? I know the group's got a bit of a tight time frame here.
Yeah, so it's an expensive piece of infrastructure to plan for and service for partial use, I guess is the best way to put it. So anytime you add lighting to a natural grass surface, typically what that does is it increases that demand on that piece of infrastructure, because then all of a sudden you can now use it for longer periods of time. Unfortunately, with a natural grass surface, they tend to get overused, and then the natural grass surface gets degraded. And so you've invested a fair bit of budget dollars to service field lights, then to only degrade a natural grass surface. So when lights are added to sports fields, what we typically do see are lights added to sport courts, or you see them added to diamonds where the intensity of play is more focused on infields and not necessarily a full rectangular sports field surface. So order of magnitude cost for adding field lights to a rectangular field, depending on lighting or electrical service availability, you're looking anywhere between $250,000 and $500,000. Usually one light pole to install is usually about $60,000 to $80,000 per pole. For a rectangular field, you need 4 poles, plus you need all of the servicing to power it. So it is a fairly expensive piece of infrastructure to put in for a partial use.
Okay, thank you.
I have one last question. Hopefully it's brief, so we can cover the last few items on our agenda. Director Hardy.
Thanks, Chair. It will be quick. I think I read in the report, there was a cost analysis between natural turf versus artificial turf. Is one cheaper than the other over a period of time when we start looking at maintenance, et cetera?
Through the chair, I don't think we had that cost analysis in the report, but I mean, generally speaking, the capital costs of synthetic turf are quite a bit more, obviously, compared to natural surface. And in terms of how you calculate the payback, I mean, we've done those calculations for a number of previous projects, and really it's about what you include in that calculation. So one of the, call it challenges or dynamics with synthetic or artificial turf is that the lifespan is about 10 to 12 years. So you're continually trying to fund a capital reserve as compared to a natural surface field, which has a much larger lifespan. Blair, anything that you can quickly add to that?
Yeah, I mean, the upfront capital cost for synthetic turf field is much more expensive than a natural grass surface. The ongoing maintenance is more expensive for natural grass because you're typically mowing it 2 or 3 times a week. You've got labor costs, you've got irrigation and water and fertility and operational costs. Where synthetic turf surface, usually it's once a month or once every number of weeks to go out there and do some garbage or litter debris cleanup. So operationally speaking, over that 10 to 12 years, natural grass is more expensive, but the upfront cost for synthetic turf is more. So as a general rule of thumb for us, in terms of cost and utilization, we typically let our clients know that one synthetic field typically equals 4 to 5 natural grass fields in terms of cost and in terms of utilization.
Just depending again on how you factor in capital reserve into that calculation, which is always a bit of the kicker.
Yeah.
Again, thanks, Chair. Again, the reason why I asked this question is if we're looking at partnering up with the school district in regards to their fields, maybe there's a cost benefit to them for having an artificial turf in place rather than a natural one. So it's a win-win for everybody. That's part of the reason why I asked the question. Thanks.
Thanks for those questions and comments, and that was a great discussion, everyone. We'll vote on receipt. Anyone opposed? And on to item number 3 in this set of reports. Over to staff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to let the commissioners know, we've gained a little time, 15 minutes from our guest presenter in our next meeting. So it is possible for you to carry on this conversation to 3:15. So I'll pass it on to Jennifer.
Thanks.
Through the chair, maybe first up, Lisa, do you have the remote control? Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Through the chair, this report addresses the additional ice options in relation to the 2017 Comox Valley Regional District Indoor Recreation Facilities Master Plan. So this is some of the thoughts that came out of it. But before we jump to that, staff wanted to provide some information on work completed to date. So top left, we have a renovated and refurbished and brightened up lobby at the sports center. That's the area coming into the pool. Down below is a refurbished skate shop and a concession as well in Arena 1. So it's kind of up to date. And of course, to the right, we have a junior B dressing room. Some additional following improvements or additional improvements for the sports center that remain a priority for the rec department is a mezzanine upgrade, parking and external entry improvements, and of course, some improved spectator seating and safety in Arena 1 by adding bucket seats and railings. So now moving forward, the additional ice options include a leisure ice pad and a full-size arena. The original leisure ice pad was envisioned as part of the 1998 construction of Arena 2. It was not realized due to budget constraints during the Arena 2 construction. And if I can just give you a quick visualization, that would go out behind the L shape of Arena 1 and Arena 2. There's a gravel parking lot around the back coming down Vanier, just to give you a little bit of visual. And then an additional full-size arena could go beside Arena 2 in the back parking lot. So since 1998, the population has grown by 17% and the demand for such a facility has strengthened. Staff have engaged Johnson Controls for high-level quotes for additional ice as per the attached in the appendix. And just some indications of why more ice is needed. Ice sports such as ringette are experiencing growth and a lot of growth. Comox Valley Hockey League continues to grow with a substantial wait list on hand. And the 2022 ice allocation report, the needs for the more drop-in skates and hockey times. And maybe we want to note no later than 11 p.m. at night. And the surge for youth in the Comox Valley alone will put additional pressure on ice use and needs in the coming years. While leisure ice may not be able to accommodate these uses specifically, it does reallocate other demands that free up arena space to accommodate these needs. And the last thing staff would like to say is that the Arena 1 slab remains a concern. A more thorough analysis is scheduled to be completed during the 2023 off-ice season. And should repairs be imminent, it may be best considered with a possible leisure ice pad for efficiencies, construction, and design services. So on that note, staff are available for questions.
Great, thank you for that presentation. I have Director Arbor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In regards to the report by Johnson Controls, Is there any consideration by staff, like in the aquatic report, we talk about obviously potentially the end of life kind of cycle of the pool. And I know that the new building for the leisure ice pat seems to fit in that space. I mean, I'm looking at the drawing. So is there, and rather than build a new building and all the next facility, could we plan in 10 or 15 years at end of life to add the leisure ice pad where the pool currently is? Is that an option that could be contemplated?
Through the chair, there's so many wonderful options for that sports center facility, and that's certainly something that can be reviewed. Some of the questions behind that will be maybe more to do with ice plants and reconfiguration and being able to reach that area. Certainly something to be considered, absolutely.
Don't see anyone else with their lights on, so I'll ask a question. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Director Hardy.
Is there potential for an outdoor pool to go there?
Through the chair, the sports center facility's got a lot of potential.
It's a great answer. And Director Grant up next.
Yeah, thank you. I think something that we need to put our head to too is a proper sized ice rink with proper seating for about 1,500. I know it's probably a little bit initial now, but we're certainly the size of community that could use something like that. If you want to get proper junior A hockey in, that's what you need to do it. That brings in many more concerts and all sorts of other things that you could sell that building out in. And if we are going to build another ice rink at some point, I think we need to really get our heads around the seating capacity and how that's going to work, because it's one of the conundrums of this building right now. When we added the other ice surface, we eliminated that possibility. And I think it's something that's missing in a community our size. So something for the future that I think of.
Through the chair, thank you.
Thank you. I've got, who's number 10? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Doug.
So a quick response. We've been hearing a lot of the future notion here in this meeting and the past meeting. So I think, in our strategic planning session, we'll make note of that. And we will spend a little bit of time on what that 20-year vision looks like, both in terms of ice, future things to consider for siting. That arena in particular is probably in the $35 million mark, or even a little higher potentially. So, but we will take some time in our strategic planning session also to look way ahead, as well as look at our immediate needs that have been identified through these plans. So I just want to give you that consideration, because I won't be speaking to you again before that meeting potentially. So it's a good time.
Thank you. And Director Kettler up next.
Thank you, Chair. Just wondering if we did have an arena that was the size of a proper competitive arena, as Director Grant just talked about, would that also encompass some of the needs of the agriplex and maybe offset that need there? Or is that something staff could look into?
Madam Chair, I think that's a possibility. I think the agriplex have asked for support in a business planning process that can flesh out exactly what is intended and what the potential is. So if at a later date, the commission can consider their request, I would certainly support some level of planning and analysis with that group and the broader community as to the possibility of a large built space. What are the uses that would be accommodated, and whether they are feasible or not.
Thank you.
Thanks. And alternate Director Jolicoeur.
Yeah, that was actually my question. The multi-uses of a new space. The second really quick question, you alluded to parking improvements that are ongoing or planned. Is there e-chargers part of the parking improvements?
Through the chair, when staff come forward with the 2023 to 2027 financial plan, it'll be noted in there that the EV charging stations are coming in 2023 and 2024.
Great. Seeing no other questions, we can vote on receipt. Anyone opposed? That's carried. Let's move on to the final item in these reports. Right, back to staff.
And Madam Chair, at the last commission, you received a delegation from the Comox Valley Cricket Club. They were asking for your consideration for.
Wait, one more.
Have you not finished did you not blend the reports, Jennifer? I'm sorry.
Through the chair, there's one more to go.
My apologies. I will back up. Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair, we are on the home stretch though. Staff are here today to provide the Comox Valley Rec Commission with a quick update on capital projects completed for 2022 for the Comox Valley Recreation Complex. So some outcomes in 2022 included the Arena 1 stereo system, the main lobby heat and cool, the Arena 1 and 2 LED lighting upgrades, Arena 1 compressor replacements, main pool circulation for the sports center and the aquatic center fire system improvements and the aquatic center security system. So just as a refresher, in March 2019, the strategic planning session, the commission identified asset management focusing on using the asset management process to develop the long-term plan for the rec infrastructure and sustainable service delivery as one of the 5 strategic priorities. So this here is this work that's been done is part of that outcome. And moving forward, the department continues to act on sound asset management practices, and this includes the implementation of annual capital projects for our 2 aging infrastructures. Under the yearly planning, currently estimates an asset management work of 1.5 million, and as of this morning, we could cinch it down to 1.175 million for capital planning. And so lastly, ongoing asset management implementation will result in a strategic funding strategy to ensure funds are available to meet ongoing infrastructure investment and community service needs. In response to a previous question and maybe comment made earlier about asset management, the history of the sports and aquatic center facilities has been, looking back as far as staff can see, has been about paying off the current facilities that we have, which is the sports center and the aquatic center, and then paying off the debt for the curling club. And of course, moving forward, a really good important point that was made today is that staff look to work on the strategic financial process to ensure that dollars are put away for future planning, whether it's for further asset management on the current facilities or moving forwards one day with a new infrastructure or renovated infrastructure. So on that note, staff are available for questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions on the final report? Don't see any. Oh. Alternate Director Shelley Kerr.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I guess for staff, just kind of highlighted at a board of directors meeting in December around procurement, and it doesn't necessarily explicitly mention any relationship to the CVRD's environmental goals and climate change goals. But when it comes to asset management, and we talk about replacement and repair, is there an aspect around how we consider the procurement process for those repairs and replacements from an environmental and social perspective? And just while I have the mic, the second question is when there are aspects of our assets that are at end of life and requiring upgrades, are we also holding those upgrades, replacements, repairs to accessibility standards?
Through the chair, so maybe the first one I'll respond to is the procurement process. So there's actually a component in there required by anybody that does bid onto any of the RFPs and RFQs to ensure that they do meet the current GHG emissions and climate action strategies for the Comox Valley Regional District. And then maybe the second piece in respects to when we do replace out components, a couple things. Maybe the first thing I'll say is components are no longer switched out for like. So an air handling unit that was put in 1975 or 1978 would now be considered low end basic. And so we strive to change out our equipment to meet the newer standards of GHG and emissions and those kinds of things. And then also in respects to accessibility, that's one of the top key things, is ensuring that whatever we are switching out does have an accessibility factor if it's linked to accessibility.
Are you finished? Yeah. Great. Yeah, that was a good place to land after reviewing all the possible additional considerations for infrastructure. It's important to remind ourselves that not only do these bring new operational costs, but also asset management obligations. So yeah, there's a lot for us to consider leading up to our March 2nd session. And just to complete the discussion, we'll vote on receipt. Anyone opposed? That's carried. And we have an item under new business related to the Comox Valley Cricket Club delegation from last week.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Remember what I said a few minutes ago? Do you want to direct staff to do any investigation on your behalf with respect to that request?
Yeah, we don't have a recommendation or a motion on the agenda, so someone would need to make one and then we could vote on it.
You voted on receipt.
Director Arbor.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it would be good. Going back to the start of the meeting, I think outdoor recreation is our best investment at this tough economic time where buildings are expensive. And I thought the Cricket Club did an excellent job of presenting their needs, which are quite small, in my opinion, in relation to the benefit long-term it will bring. So be quite happy to support asking staff to work with the Cricket Club, probably in the context of our recreation grant. That would be my only question to staff, whether that would be the proper place to locate that request.
Does someone want to second that?
I'll second.
Did we move receipt on this one?
Put forward a motion.
Oh, okay. We'll vote on receipt in that case. Anyone opposed? That's carried. And yep, go ahead, Director Kerr.
Sure. So yeah, I'll make the motion that Director Arbor just put forth, if that's okay.
Thank you. And any discussion on the motion? Did you want to respond to Director Arbor's question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think through the rec grant would be an appropriate place for this to suggest that they apply through our application portal. And I would subsequently recommend at that time that it would be obviously subject to them finding a suitable home for that place. And that might involve conversations for them with the municipalities. So that should be sent forth if you so desire.
Thank you. And Director Hardy.
Thanks. I did have one question. I mean, I'm totally on board with the Cricket Club and trying to advance that sport in the Comox Valley. My only thought or concern would be that concrete pad and the potential impact to other users in that field. For example, somebody's out there playing fastball or something or slow pitch and an outfielder goes sliding into that concrete pad. Is there potential for injury or whatever there? So just one of the things that was going through my mind after the presentation last week is taking that into consideration as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I imagine that could come back through a report.
Yep, for sure, Madam Chair. I understand that the board wants us to look into such matters. That will have to include discussions with the host municipality, or is it the school district, whether it's Lewis Park or another facility. So we certainly will have those conversations and help the Cricket Club to advance those considerations and report that back along with the funding options and implications for the Rec Commission when we report back to you.
Thank you. And seeing no other lights on for discussion, we'll vote on the motion. Anyone opposed? That's carried. Meetings.